Welcome to Vermont Today. I'm Terence Jeroloman, your host, and my guest this month is Charlotte Dennett. Charlotte is a lawyer, a journalist, and she received 17,000 votes in a race for Attorney General in 2008. She comes to us from Cambridge, Vermont, where she lives. And Charlotte and I are both members of the Progressive Party State Committee. Charlotte, would you like to tell the viewers something about your background and where you went to school?
Background, how far back do you want to go?
Well, you grew up in Massachusetts, didn't you?
I grew up in Massachusetts. I'd actually been born in Beirut, Lebanon, and my father was in the Foreign Service, but he died when I was an infant, so I ended up going back to the States with my mother and my older brother and sister, and I grew up in Winchester, Massachusetts. That was my father's hometown. It's a little suburb of Boston. And yeah.
I lived in Boston for 6 years. I got my degree in electrical engineering from Northeastern University.
Wow.
And I lived in the Back Bay. Winchester is just one of the suburbs to the north, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, nice little town. And I went to high school there, but the last 2 years of high school, my mother wanted to go back to Beirut. She missed it. You know, Beirut in those days was considered like the Paris of the Middle East. It was a beautiful, culturally thriving city and beautifully located right in the heart of the Middle East and close to Europe. And I had heard a great deal about it in my life growing up. So I did go back with her, and I had my two last years in high school were at the American Community School. Then I came back to the United States, went to college, Wheaton College. It's a women's college in Massachusetts. Then I got my master's degree in art history in Florence, Italy. And then in the early 70s, my mother died while I was overseas. And I was then basically on my own, and I decided to go back to Beirut. And I became a journalist in Beirut, and was there from 72 to 75, traveled all over the Middle East. I worked for a English language magazine called Middle East Sketch. It sort of modeled itself after a British magazine called The Sketch. And the publisher, who was Armenian, wanted it to be like the Time or Newsweek of the Middle East. So I was their roving correspondent, got sent into incredible places. I mean, Iran, I went to Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates, and of course, then I traveled all over Syria, Lebanon, Israel. So that was a great period in my life, a great learning period. And then the Civil War broke out in 1975. I had been caught up in a skirmish that was sort of the prelude to the Civil War in Lebanon, and was shot at, and henceforth very protected by the newspaper I was then working for, the English language Beirut Daily Star. And so I decided I would go home for the summer, and never went back for 30 years. The Civil War just got worse and worse, so I decided to stay in the States, and that's where I met my future husband. We were doing reporting in New York, and that took me in a whole new trajectory. We ended up doing a book about the genocide of indigenous peoples in Latin America. So now I've brought you up to 1975, when we headed off on that grand adventure, if you like.
That was Thy Will Be Done.
That's right. A
1,000-page book.
Yes.
That's a very long book.
Yes, it was. It was. Well, you know, we were very much influenced by Woodward and Bernstein. We were going to be the great investigative journalists as well. I mean, there were many people who were influenced by them, you know, the famous Washington Post reporters that exposed Watergate. So we had high hopes that we were going to uncover the perpetrators of genocide of indigenous people, which had actually raged in the 60s and 70s, and about 100,000 people had died or disappeared. They'd been pushed off their land, and many of the same techniques that had been used in the American West had been used down there in the Amazon to get rid of Indians whose lands were coveted for natural resources, And the other the initial focus was to look at the role of evangelical missionaries. Why was it that they were turning a blind eye to what was happening to their own wards? That was a big issue for us. The other question was the CIA helping them out, as was widely suspected? And ultimately, the other factor that we discovered after about 5 years of investigation is that the entities that wanted Indian land were based in the Northeast and were large oil companies, mining and ranching companies. And one of the people that was really an architect of U.S. foreign policy post-World War II, right up to the time we were there, was Nelson Rockefeller, which a lot of people didn't know. Nelson Rockefeller most people know him as the governor of New York, and then the vice president under President Ford, but he also had a hidden empire in Latin America. So the ultimate title of the book is Thy Will Be Done, The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil.
There's another really good book about South America that I just finished reading, Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. Mm-hmm. Hugo Chavez gave this book to Barack Obama when they met last year. And I wonder what you think of this. Here on page 228, it says, international charity does not exist. The role of foreign aid is primarily domestic. The U.S. economy aids itself. Many people think, well, we shouldn't be so generous to the rest of the world and give people our money when we need it here at home. But actually, we're not giving them anything. We're just, it's sort of like the Spanish went in there and conquered them 500 years ago. Now we're doing pretty much the same thing with our aid, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we document that, and Thy Will Be Done, too. And you're absolutely right. The American people have been led to believe that we're so generous and that we spend an awful lot of money down there. But really, what the whole point of providing aid is to pave the way for corporate penetration and corporate investments, whether it's in Latin America or elsewhere. That is the purpose of aid. And, it's been going on for a very long time. The whole point, if you sort of understand the mechanisms of capitalism, other than the fact that competition is what makes Johnny run, and so everyone's competing against everybody else to get the resources and to produce a cheaper product. The other aspect of it that is very fundamental is that once you've exhausted a market, for instance, after we had expanded westward, we Americans, then you had to go explore new markets. You needed new markets for your products. So the logical stepping stone for the United States was to go to the south of us, to Latin America. So that's when the penetration began. The late 19th century, the penetration of the Caribbean, the Spanish-American War. And then what our book did is we documented how the United States had penetrated Latin America during World War II, when Nelson Rockefeller actually had a very cushy job in Washington. He was appointed by the Democrat, Franklin Roosevelt, to be coordinator of inter-American affairs. And what he did is he set up an entire network whose purpose was to get rid of the Germans and the Japanese in Latin America, and there was a fairly large presence, and even the British, to minimize their presence and to maximize Americans' presence in Latin America, and it was very effective.
And now your new book, The People versus Bush, this has just been published.
Yes.